Good evening, everybody. My name is Paul Upex. I'm part of the Labour Party training team, usually based at Labour Party head office, but like all of us, based at home for the past year in sunny Margate on the south coast. We have been working on this session with Louisa's team, who've been led on that, and this is the third out of four webinars that we've presented. All the previous two webinars are available at labour.org.uk/GFA. And also you can sort of watch previous ones as well. Tonight on the session, there's an opportunity for you to ask questions. So please use the Q&A in there to ask them, and we'll do our best to get through as many as possible of those questions as well. So please do that. We're hearing from all of our panelists, and then we're going to be taking the questions at the end. So the session should run about an hour or so, and we'll do our best to get through as many of those questions as well. So there is who we've joined with tonight. We've got Louise Haigh, Professor John Tong, Tara Grace Connolly, Aaron Hughes, Chris Swan, and Kane Emerson. And we're all going to hear from them at each different points within the session. But first of all, I'm going to hand over to Louise Haigh, who's going to tell you a little bit more about this session tonight and the work that we have, the work that she's been doing as part of the Good Friday Agreement training. And then we're going to, I think it's back over to me for a little poll as well after that, Louise, and then we'll hear from other people. So over to you now, Louise.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Paul, and thanks to you and your team as ever for all the work that you've done in pulling this together. And brilliant to see so many people on the call again this evening for the third instalment of the Good Friday Education Programme. I should also say, if you can hear some gnawing in the background, that's not me, it's my dog that's being distracted by many treats. So if he pops up, that's it's not anyone I've kept captive or anybody, anything like that. It's brilliant to see so many of you, as I say. The Good Friday Agreement Education Programme is already the most subscribed training and education event ever held by the Labour Party. And that's testament to the real thirst across our movement to understand the place of the Good Friday Agreement in the history of these islands, Labour's role in helping achieve it, and most importantly, the impact that it's having on Northern Ireland and on the debate today. That story of the Good Friday Agreement has been told and rehearsed down the years, but what's perhaps less known and less celebrated across the United Kingdom in relation to the Good Friday Agreement is that the vast majority of similar international peace agreements fail. But what the genius of the Good Friday Agreement was the principle of consent, of parity of esteem, of shared rights, and the shared future that was imagined 23 years ago. Those are the values that have managed to sustain it for over a generation now. And that's why it's really wonderful to give a platform to some young voices today, to the ceasefire generation who have grown up knowing only peace. Because that was the real prize for many of the negotiators and the people of Northern Ireland who spoke so powerfully about their objective at the time, that their children wouldn't have to go through what they have had to for decades in the lead up to 1998. John Hume famously said on accepting his Nobel Peace Prize that people persevered for peace so that our children could look to the future with a smile of hope. And I think that was what drove the vast majority of people who came together in the interests of peace. Seamus Mallon of the SDLP and David Trimble of the Ulster Unionist Party, in the fraught days leading up to peace and in the shadow of tragedy, visited Points Pass together, where two of their friends, Philip Allen, a Protestant, and Damien Traynor, a Catholic, had been murdered by a loyalist criminal gang in South Armagh. Both David Trimble and Seamus Mallon later wrote how the death of those two young friends from different communities, as they discussed plans for one of their weddings, was a moment of huge clarity. They needed to do whatever it took to get the peace deal over the line for the many young people who died and for communities across Northern Ireland. So today, as I say, we're really privileged to hear from a group of young people who have been part of that peace and to hear their experience, the first generation who have known only peace. And they are part of huge changes that are taking place in Northern Ireland today. I think that's really brought home to me most in my year in the brief now as Shadow Secretary of State, when I speak to young people from across all communities, and I'm sure we'll hear some of that come across tonight. The first thing they mention isn't the conflict or about the past. It's about education, it's about jobs, it's about people able to love and marry who they like and making sure that there is a planet left to live on when their grandchildren are born. And it's exactly the same priorities that the rest of us hold across the labour movement in Great Britain as well. And I think that's an incredible reflection of the changes that have taken place in Northern Ireland. Young people graduating from university or starting work completely free from conflict, though mindful, of course, of the intergenerational burden of that conflict. As we heard in the last brilliant session with the amazing women who helped negotiate the Good Friday Agreement, the agreement and its success was about a new participative politics. And the argument that the Women's Coalition put forward was designed to give the trade union movement, as well as the community and women's movement, a place in political policy making, and therefore a stake in the future of Northern Ireland. And for me and for the whole Shadow Northern Ireland team in the Labour Party, we want to make sure that our politics in relation to Northern Ireland is as inclusive as possible. And we want to add young people to that as well. Make sure that young people have a stake and a voice and a say in their future and a say in the inheritance that this generation of politicians leaves for them to take up. So that's why I'm really happy to introduce you to some of the brilliant young people who we're really grateful to hear from tonight, who will talk to us about their experiences of the Good Friday Agreement and the enormous amount of work that's still to do. We have Tara Grace Connolly, who was Ireland's first UN youth representative from the North. From West Belfast, she has spoken at UN forums around the world on human rights and youth participation. Aaron Hughes is from the All Ireland Peacebuilding Organisation, Cooperation Ireland. Chris Swan is in the Labour Party Irish Society. His parents are from across the traditional sectarian divide in Northern Ireland and has spoken powerfully about how his generation is now looking forward. And Kane Emerson, originally from Northern Ireland and now living in London, is the youth officer of Islington South in Finsbury CLP. But as you said, Paul, it's back to you now for a quick poll of people ahead of the fantastic speakers we've got today.
I'm now just going to open that poll as well. And basically what it is, we're asking you, were you born at the time of the Good Friday Agreement? And then I'm also asking a little bit about the knowledge that you might have. So we're just going to launch that there. And we'll just do that. And while I do that, I'm just going to get back onto sharing my screen as well. Okay, and I'm just going to share the results of this. So I can tell now that the vast majority of people, 97% of people, were born at the time of the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. And also, before I end it, we can see here the flattening out, but 14% people think they have a good knowledge, 36% have fairly good knowledge, 43% have average, and 8% not a lot. So we've all got something to learn tonight. And I think as part of that, I'm going to hand you over to Professor John Tong for the next part of tonight's session. Over to you now, John.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, Louise. And a warm welcome to everyone. It's great to see yet again so many people logging on for this session. As those of you who saw me on screen before will readily confirm, I'll be brief because I'm not young, and tonight is for young people. So I just want to set the scene by looking at the benefits that have accrued to young people as a consequence of the Good Friday Agreement, and they can hardly be overstated. It's also worth noting just how many people in Northern Ireland were born after the Good Friday Agreement. Northern Ireland is a young society. More than 600,000 people in Northern Ireland were born after the 1998 peace deal, around one third of the population. And if you compare that generation and the benefits they've enjoyed compared to the generation reared during the Troubles, the benefits are huge because of the successes of the Good Friday Agreement. The level of violence has dropped so dramatically, so young people enjoy much greater security. Of course, there's been political instability in Northern Ireland, but things are nowhere near as bad as they were. Employment prospects have improved hugely for young people, because if you look at unemployment, what it averaged in Northern Ireland, 30% amongst young people during the 1980s, during the Troubles, and overall 20%. Today, Northern Ireland is a success story in employment terms. Unemployment is only around 4%, and youth unemployment is low. Well, perhaps the most important statistic on that slide in front of you is who died in the conflict. And it was young people who died in the largest numbers. A quarter of the victims, a quarter of the deaths during that conflict were aged between 18 and 23. And although all lives, irrespective of age, are equally grieved, if you think of the lost years So many young lives ended because of the conflict. And I think that highlights the importance of the Good Friday Agreement. And the last point on this slide is also to say that young people at the time, those who were young in 1998, dearly wanted the Good Friday Agreement. They voted in even bigger numbers in favour of the agreement, if you look at the data, than other generations, even though those of all ages showed a majority in favour of the deal. So I think those are important statistics to set the context of the benefits for young people and why the Good Friday Agreement really matters to the peace generation. So moving on, Paul, if you want to move to the next slide. Yeah. Okay, this just emphasises what I've said sort of graphically. If you look at the deaths and the figures for injuries, many of them life-changing injuries, it has to be said, are very, very similar. If you look at the largest single category of deaths during the Troubles, it was those aged between, not even reached the age of 1 up to 29. They were the largest single category of deaths during the conflict. So young people were grievously affected by the Troubles from 1970 until the Good Friday Agreement of 1998. There's the actual figures there on the left. So moving on to the next slide. What does the Good Friday Agreement say about young people? Well, it recognises, the Good Friday Agreement in the text itself recognises that although a lot of those deaths of young people geographically concentrated, it recognises, how young people were particularly adversely affected. And it says that young people affected by the Troubles will be supported by community-based initiatives based on international best practice. And a lot of the peace funding that has been poured into Northern Ireland, succession of EU peace funds in particular, have been trying to either wean young people away from violence, rebuild communities, and assist the peace generation in stabilising Northern Ireland. And I think overall that has been a huge success story. If you think back to the prospects for a young person in Northern Ireland, how bleak they were in the 1970s and 1980s. It's quite something what has been achieved by the Good Friday Agreement. But one of the themes that Lewis has emphasised during these webinars is that the Good Friday Agreement is a work in progress. There is still work to be done. No one is claiming it has created a utopia. So if we move on to my last slide, I've just picked out 3 areas where there is still work to be done. One is in respect of the residual paramilitarism that is still evident in Northern Ireland. There are approximately 80 punishment attacks annually, and the overwhelming majority of victims of those punishment attacks by paramilitary groups are in their 20s. 1 in 8 is a teenager. The youngest victim was 12. And actually, because of the fear that engenders within communities, it's very rare for such attacks to end in prosecutions. So young people are still the victims of violence, albeit on nothing like the scale that was once endured. A second point to make is the need for the reintegration of Northern Ireland society. And I choose my words carefully here because this is not an attack on faith schools. In prehistoric times, I was a product of one. I hope it turned out all right and not a crazy bigot. It's simply to make the point that there is a need for greater reintegration of Northern Ireland because many young people, particularly in working class areas, they don't get together, they don't come together until they're 18. And finally, perhaps one of the more depressing statistics post Good Friday Agreement is that young people are reluctant to participate in Northern Ireland's elections, whether there are numerous reasons put forward for that, but only a minority of young people have voted in whether it be assembly elections or Westminster elections. But let's improve youth voice. It's good to see that a youth assembly was created that is attached to the Northern Ireland Assembly that was created last year, and I wish it every success. Well, that's enough from the oldest person on screen tonight. Let's hand over to Tara to begin the youth voice. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, John. So hello, good evening. Thanks for inviting me and thanks for tuning in to listen to speak today. I'm Tara Grace. I'm 23. I'm from Belfast. I'm currently one of 2 UN Youth Delegates for Ireland. I represent the voices of 1.3 million Irish young people at the United Nations as part of Ireland's official delegation to the UN during Security Council year. That's a big task. So it's not something I take lightly. Before I focus on maybe some of that work and how that ties into the topic of the evening, I kind of want to give a bit of background as to where I come from and the family that I come from in relation to the Good Friday Agreement and peace. I am from a very working class family from a nationalist Republican area in the Lower Falls in West Belfast. And I think it's quite important to state that I wouldn't exist if the Troubles hadn't happened. Both of my parents were burnt out of their homes in 1972. They were both relocated to the Clonard area of West Belfast, and they met as children who had both had to relocate to the one area. So that I literally wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for the Troubles. The conflict touched my family's lives in more ways than I can even describe. The fact that, like, as I said, both parents were burnt out of their homes. My mum's cousin is quite a well-known victim of the Troubles, a boy called Brian Stewart, who was killed at age 13. They've seen countless friends and family die. And on a more personal level, again, my dad was the victim of an unprovoked sectarian attack in 1991 that has left him with lifelong damage. So it still touches my life today. It's still something that affects my life up until the present. And something that is really sort of important to note during that time period is John's already kind of very eloquently highlighted how young people were so disproportionately affected, and that's in all areas of life. You know, if there's bombs going off in the street, what would really motivate you to do well in school? There are so many areas that it touched on young people's lives. And I think it's really important to note that who I am now is entirely informed by the experiences my parents had before me and the struggles that they went through. And that includes having to march for their civil rights as 15 and 16-year-olds and taken to the streets because they felt as though who they were was not being recognised and not being respected, which kind of touches on now how the Good Friday Agreement has so profoundly changed the direction of my life. I was born in 1997, so I was about 6 months old when the Good Friday Agreement was signed, and that has been the only life I have known has been in a peace settlement. And I have been one of the young people that has benefited so greatly from peace funding, from cross-community youth organisations, from on-the-ground youth work and community building that has really transformed the course of my life and given me opportunities that my parents could never even have dreamt of as young people on the Lower Falls in the 70s and 80s. I got involved in youth work when I was about 13, 14 for no other reason than because I was looking to make friends. And a moment that really sticks in my brain is that I met another young girl who I'm still friends with now, who was from the other side of the community, and heard openly saying I was the first Catholic person she'd ever met in real life. She'd never seen one before, she'd never spoken to one before. And those organisations, such as the Belfast Youth Forum that I was involved in, the Northern Ireland Youth Forum that I'm currently involved in, really gave me the opportunity to fully realise myself and my own potential, which is one aspect of it, but also to meet other young people and to form lifelong friendships across divides, which was something that just couldn't have happened in my parents' generation. But I suppose that kind of will lead me directly into the work that I'm doing now. As was mentioned earlier on, I am UN Youth Delegate for Ireland, but I'm also the first young person from the north of Ireland to be in this role. And for myself, that holds significance for a couple of reasons. I think, you know, as a young person, that's a big deal to have broken down that barrier. And I think it's particularly important to note that a young person from the north of Ireland was selected to represent young people in the year that Ireland's on the Security Council and there's issues surrounding Brexit. I think it's a move that is significant enough that I'm being given that platform to discuss those issues openly at the United Nations. But something that it ties directly into the Good Friday Agreement, which was I would never have had that opportunity if the Good Friday Agreement didn't exist, because the Good Friday Agreement gives me my right to identify as Irish, to claim that identity, to be part of the nation of Ireland, and that had the Good Friday Agreement not been here, this is a position I never could have been in, and I could never be in this position to amplify Northern young people's voices at that level in the UN. It gives me such a gateway to be able to talk to young people right across the island and not only have them bring their issues to me that they want me to discuss, but also be able to educate more people about life in the north and how young people in Ireland aren't that different from people across the border. And it really is, from, if I think back to my grandparents and my parents, who their right to Irish citizenship, which is something that is very important to people, identity in the north, although it is often used as a bit of a joke and is bandied back and forth, it is important and it is personal. And for me to think that, you know, my parents would be marching to City Hall at my age, not being able to assert that right, for me to now be part of Ireland's official delegation to the UN and to represent my country on that level is something that to me seems quite poetic that journey has went on, and that journey couldn't have happened had it not been for the Good Friday Agreement, had it not been for the peace settlement, and had not been for all the opportunities that it afforded. I don't know how much or how long I've been speaking for now, but I don't want to take up too much time, so I'll wrap it up there. It's a bit of a brief insight as to who I am and how the Good Friday Agreement has brought me to where I am. So I will hand over to the next amazing speaker, who is Aaron Hughes. I've worked extensively with Aaron before on Brexit. I would dare say we're good friends. But also aside from that, he's a really amazing young person. He's done so much work in his local community. So listen up.
Thank you very much, Tara. It's very hard to follow on from yourself. Absolutely amazing. The work that you're doing on all island level is amazing. To have a young person like yourself leading us it is phenomenal. So thanks very much for inviting me and coming along. It's great to see so many people here. And I think it's such an important issue that the Labour Party is addressing and highlighting and running these training sessions, especially for the people in Northern Ireland. It's a big part of our life. People across the island of Ireland, it's a big part of our life. The Good Friday Agreement, in terms of what it's done for us, as Tara's just very nicely outlined. So my name's Aaron Hughes. I'm 19. I'm from West Belfast, Colwyn area, so not as lower down as Tara's from, but up towards the further away from the centre of Belfast. Currently, I'm a first year law and politics student at Queen's University. Well, first year to start uni, so it is online. But I'm also a TBUC Young Ambassador with the Department of Communities and Cooperation Ireland. So TBUC is one of the strategies designed by the Northern Ireland Executive to tackle sectarianism and to bring communities together. So it stands for Together Building a United Community. So I've been involved in that program for a number of years, and much of my work in terms of this program is about bringing communities together, engaging young people. It's about youth work. So actually, straight after this call, as soon as I hit 7 o'clock, I'm going to have to leave to go and host a session and going in virtually to Ballymena to host a good relations sessions on leadership and good relations. So that's my job. That's what I do every day, as well as being a student. Alongside that, I volunteer in my local area in terms of I'm a youth worker. So again, addressing those issues in a local organisation called Lagmore Youth Project, which I've helped set up and helped run over the past year or so. So as I've said, like much of my background and much of where I came from is from youth work, very similar to Tara. Youth and community work has been how I've got to where I am today, and I can't highlight the importance of how much that has benefited, and the likes of TBUC and the likes of peace funding from the European Union has helped and benefited my generation to get to where we are today. There is so much work that needs to be done, and I think we may come to that in the discussion, but to get to where we are today, it has been phenomenal. So from about the age of 13, that's when I started getting involved in cross-community programs and cross-border programs, obviously with Cooperation Ireland. And it's a privilege to be on these programs because there's young people out there, as Tara said, who don't have that privilege. Like I've met people out there who have never met someone from the other side of the community. And I think that's absolutely astonishing. You're living in a country where people literally a stone throw away, who likely in the past you may have actually thrown a stone at them people, you've never met them. And to think of, you go through the likes of your school years, you go through, get brought up, and you get to the age of 18 and you go to university, and that's probably one of the only places where you'll be forced into integration. There's no Catholic or Protestant universities, there's no Catholic and Protestant jobs. So at that age, there's just shows the huge importance of bringing communities together, and that's essentially what the Good Friday Agreement done. And as John said, like there's people there who have never met, and Tara outlined as well, and that's quite shocking, and that's where the work still needs to happen, and where the cross community work needs to take place. As Tara says, we've worked a lot together over the last 3 or 4 years. So we were the co-founders of Our Future, Our Choice Northern Ireland, a youth-led anti-Brexit campaign pushing for a second referendum. And through leading that campaign, it is what brought me to actually reflect on the Good Friday Agreement. Before that, I actually never thought about it. And to be honest, I thought politics was really boring and politicians were, I actually won't go into that, but I didn't think it was to do with me. And I think that's what a lot of young people think. Whereas as I got involved, I started to reflect on the Good Friday Agreement. What did that do to me, and how did it impact me? And I think it might be worth also explaining my family background. So I'm from a Republican area, Republican family. Although my grandparents were from a mixed background, I was still raised in that kind of area, in that background. My dad is a former West Belfast black taxi driver, and there's an automatic association with back in the days of a black taxi driver in the IRA. So I actually remember going on holiday to Egypt, and whenever I was driving into the hotel, they had a lot of security in place, and I remember a security guy pulling out a big long metal pole, and on the end of it was a camera, or it was on the end of it was a mirror, and he walked around the bus looking for bombs or whatever underneath the bus. And then I was shocked, but then my daddy actually told me it wasn't too long ago that my daddy has to do that every day as a black taxi driver. He had to go out every single morning and check underneath his form of job, check underneath the taxi to ensure he wasn't a target, and that has changed completely. And I didn't grow up with that. I probably was too young to remember that, but that just shows how far we've came along, and that is down to the Good Friday Agreement. It brought peace. It means that people don't have to fear for what job they're in. It means people don't have to fear of who they're associated with or where they live. So that really brought it home to me when my dad was explaining to me that he used to do that every day, that there was a fear that because the job he had, he could have been a target. So I think as a generation of young people moving forward, I think I have never experienced violence as it was in the past, and I think that is a key thing. Although a lot of people in Northern Ireland have become normalized to certain things, for example, shootings. There was a shooting around the corner from my street, literally a 2-minute walk a number of weeks ago by Parnell Street, and to me that's just like reading the news of there's going to be bad weather, and that is a really, really negative thing that has happened, and we need to address that. And I think that's the involvement that we all have to try and address that should never be the case. A shooting should never be normalized. It should never be a case of oh that's just another thing kind of thing. So that is something that I've grown up with, and we've kind of got normalized to. But that needs addressed, and I think that's what the Good Friday Agreement has put in place. Those processes to allow us to start addressing those, and those people on the ground, the likes of politicians, the likes of youth workers, they're all working to address that. And I think young people, the Good Friday Agreement has actually brought somewhat normalization. If the Good Friday Agreement didn't happen, we don't know where we would be right now. We don't know what conditions we would be living in, to be honest. And I think that is the huge success. And we need to rebuild what was damaged. Like we had 30 years of just no progression, no development, no moving forward of certain issues on the likes of our education system, the likes of our health service. Our education system, as John said, is segregated. I went to a Catholic school, and only Catholic school. I didn't meet Protestants through my school. I met Protestants from doing extra activities outside of school. And I think that is, or anyone from any sort of background, doesn't have to be Protestant. It could be other people that are living here. Our health service has 100 times the waiting lists than in England, because we have not been addressing that. We've a lot of times we're talking about the past and not talking about the here and now and getting on with the issues that matter. And I think that's a big thing to take away, that young people, although the past is a huge issue, young people right now are very focused on where do we go next? How do I improve myself? How do I get those jobs? And how do we improve? So I think just to kind of close off as well, I think the Good Friday Agreement brought the end of violence. It gave us a pathway towards, for me especially, to build a united future, to build a community. Yes, we're going to have differences, but let's embrace them. Let's get involved in them. Let's start moving forward and building something together. And I think these kind of discussions are fundamental to that and involving young people, because young people are the ones that are out there pushing for it. So huge thanks for listening, and I look forward to the questions. And I think I'm going to hand over to Chris now.
Yes, thanks very much, Aaron, and thanks, Tara, as well. It's two really, really powerful contributions, very difficult to follow. I'm Chris Swan. I'm 20. I'm a Law with Politics student at Ulster University, and I'm also the Youth and Student Officer of the Labour Party Irish Society. I want to thank everyone for joining this evening's call, first and foremost. It's really, really encouraging that so many people in the Labour Party are taking a keen interest in the Good Friday Agreement education programme. To date, it's now more than ever, it's important we raise awareness of just how delicate the hard-won peace in Northern Ireland really is. I was born in Belfast in 2000 to parents from either side of the traditional sectarian divide, who married only 3 months after the signing of the agreement in 1998. Their relationship, like my maternal grandparents before them, was at odds with much of the rest of Northern Irish society at the time, as it failed to recognise the context of a violent conflict which divided our two main communities on orange and green lines for many decades before. And they were hopeful of a better future on Good Friday 1998, but they were very sceptical of yet another false dawn in the Northern Irish peace process. They grew up in a society completely different to mine, under a constant fear of violence, nightly news bulletins reporting on explosions and killings on an almost daily basis, constant feelings of a political process that couldn't facilitate the many complex voices of our communities, and what seemed like a never-ending cycle of ceasefires being broken on both sides of the divide, a society that was shaped by the narrative of us and them. The place I'm proud to call home today is very different, a very different place to what it was then. I've enjoyed a life largely free from the fear of armed conflict. I have friends from all backgrounds. Both my siblings are at a cross-community integrated school, and opportunities my parents simply couldn't have imagined. I enjoyed an upbringing with exposure to the rich cultural heritage of both orange and green, a comfort in my Northern Irish identity, appreciating both British and Irish aspects of my home place, but the courage to want to work towards a future inclusive New Ireland, a position that would not have previously been expected or accepted from a young person brought up in an overwhelmingly unionist and loyalist town. The Good Friday Agreement that was negotiated by politicians of all persuasions, trade unions, women's groups, was overwhelmingly endorsed in referenda by people on both sides of the border in Ireland. It made all of that possible. It created, as the declaration of the support to the agreement stated itself, a truly historic opportunity for a new beginning, though I have to stress it was a starting point and not the finishing line. Unfortunately, as John alluded to in his introduction, many young people in Northern Ireland today have grown apathetic to our local politics, with a majority of 18 to 29-year-olds not voting in the 2019 general election. They see political institutions and a surrounding discourse that still reduces our politics to a simplified spectrum of varied shades of orange and green, with little to no focus on the material issues that affect their daily lives. I know firsthand that among my friend group from school, I'm a minority of one in holding an interest in Stormont politics. The peace generation, like all of us on the panel today, want normalisation, a term long associated with the peace process in Northern Ireland, but a term that's so far away from realisation even today. We have aspirations beyond simply orange and green and the mere absence of violence, though a monumental achievement is a low bar for our future. However, I think it's also important to stress, and I've seen some comments like this in the Q&A box, this absence of violence can under no circumstances be taken for granted. Since recklessly leaving the EU with no attempt to address legitimate concerns over the now dubbed Irish Sea border, we've seen paramilitary show of strength exercises, threats of violence to port workers in Larne, and chillingly graffiti and banners all around unionist and loyalist communities proclaiming rest in peace, Good Friday Agreement. Now, I would hazard a guess that we may have seen a similar situation pan out had we been forced to introduce border checks within the island of Ireland itself. But the Good Friday Agreement is not dead, nor will it be allowed to die under the watch of the peace generation. But we need a British government that understands just how delicate relations in Northern Ireland truly are, not a government who will use us as a political pawn in negotiations. Yesterday's dinosaurs that are bringing back these threats of violence will only be allowed to drag us back to a darker past should they be provided with the toxic political climate to thrive in this case brought to us by a callous Tory government. The Good Friday Agreement transformed my life before I was even born. It created the basis for a peace generation, but myself and the others on this panel tonight are all looking forward, not back now. And where the Tories have divided so far, Labour must lead by bringing people together, as Mo Mowdham was able to in 1998. Labour Party members must begin to drop preconceptions of Northern Ireland and listen to the many perspectives from across the Irish Sea, challenging your own previously held views and embracing Labour's position as an independent, honest broker that can facilitate that cooperation and compromise. Over the past number of months, as we approach the 23rd anniversary of the agreement, I hope this initiative has helped to do just that. And as I said, it's been really encouraging to see such a high turnout on all of these webinars. I'm not going to go on too much longer. I would like to hand over to Cian Emerson, who is the Youth Officer of the Islington South CLP.
Thank you very much, Chris. That was very well said, particularly at the end. As a very active Labour Party member, it's great that we have a call to action to everyone online tonight to become more active on Irish issues in the Labour Party. So my name is Cian Emerson. I'm Youth Officer of Islington South and Finsbury CLP. My story matches a very common tale of the brain drain that is coming out of Northern Ireland. I'm a member of the young diaspora here in London. So at the moment I'm studying law here in London, but before that I was studying in Leeds, and then before that I was in the United States studying at a boarding school for a gap year. But originally, and at my heart, I am a Derry boy. The county of Hume and Heaney, and the cradle of the civil rights movement. We've got quite a few different perspectives tonight, but how I think I can add to your knowledge of what's like in Northern Ireland today is by adding my perspective as a young working class man from an Irish Catholic background who wouldn't necessarily describe oneself as a nationalist. So overall, I think that in Northern Ireland, there is a two-track peace deal. Much of the working class across Northern Ireland have been left behind. The peace dividend that we hear so much about is really localized in Belfast, firstly. Belfast tends to gain the most from the current status quo, and the middle classes. And it is my belief that the working classes in Northern Ireland have been left behind. And we know they've been left behind because many of the working class live in segregated housing. Council estates are segregated. And indeed, they're allowed to be turned into ghettos with flags adorning walls of either side and murals of paramilitary groups celebrating terrorism. And also in Northern Ireland, there are huge socioeconomic divide between the working class and the middle class. And we see this most clearly in the filtering of the working class from the best schools in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland, unlike England, has a pervasive grammar school system that filters many working class kids out. And you can really see this most clearly in Derry, where there's one school in the neighbourhood of Craigan, Bogside, Brandywell, which has a free school meals rate of about 60 to 80%. In that sixth form of that grammar school, which is the best school in Northern Ireland, only 2% of their sixth formers claim free school meals. So as a working class person, I feel that a lot of working class areas have been left out of the new peace. And I'm really heartened by the fact that this series has really focused on the Good Friday Agreement as a living document that is not yet complete. I entirely agree with that. And the Fukuyama end of history narrative that sometimes is presented in the news is not the case. And I know that so personally because the paramilitary activity that Professor John Tong talked about has impacted me directly. So when I was about 8 years old, there were a few members of the INLA who broke into my house and shot my brother. So that is one of the paramilitary shootings, punishment shootings that Professor John was talking about. And for me as a working class person, it feels that so much of normal political activity in Northern Ireland focuses on green-orange issues and green-orange violence or tension or trauma, rather than the trauma that many working class people live through as a result of the inactivity of the government to act on paramilitary activity in working class communities. So in many communities, like my own Gallia in Derry, paramilitaries do exist and they still recruit. And indeed, I know someone from my primary school who is probably involved in a proscribed organization. Yet there does not seem to be enough crackdown or activity to deal with that amongst council estates. And this creates a really pervasive fear, especially amongst young men, which is wholly detrimental to mental health. So one of the big crises in my own town of Derry is the mental health crisis. Suicides happen quite regularly, and it is high on the agenda of every young person in Derry. Yet it doesn't seem to make the agenda of Stormont because we're focused on green and orange issues yet again. And then we also see that in unionist loyalist communities where many loyalist paramilitaries engage in illegal activities such as drug dealing. And yet again, there doesn't seem to be much action on that. Indeed, Dawn said that only 3% of those punishment-style shootings end in prosecution, which is a worrying figure because we cannot allow paramilitaries to act unimpeded in working class areas, whilst the middle classes on the Malone Road get to benefit from the peace dividend that the Good Friday Agreement gave us. Then secondly, on the issue of brain drain and progressive politics, brain drain is a real issue in Northern Ireland. I'm sure Aaron, Tara and Chris all know plenty of friends who have moved away to England, Scotland or the Republic. And the likelihood is we won't move back. We want to be involved in Northern Ireland, we want to change Northern Ireland, but the likelihood is once we go to university abroad, we're not going to go back. And there are a few causes of this. I think the primary cause, however, is political parties are out of step with how young people think in Northern Ireland. And we see this so clearly in same-sex marriage and reproductive rights, where the majority of young people, and indeed the majority of all voters in Northern Ireland, would agree with the introduction of same-sex marriage. And it only took a Labour MP in Westminster to introduce it. And these political parties not being responsive to the issues that really matter to young people. I don't know many young people that are really so fervent about green and orange issues, but it's these social, cultural and economic issues that we care about. And then we also see it in diversity. So last year, there will be a BLM protests and the PSNI cracked down on them. Northern Ireland seems only to be designed for green and orange and not for other ethnic religious groups. And that's something I'd say about it as a living document, that we have to think about being more inclusive and valuing diversity much more. So someone like Anna Lowe, who was a terrific Chinese Northern Irish legislator, isn't pushed out of Stormont because of fears of racial abuse. So finally, to wrap up, so I'm not speaking too long and not being too depressing, I would really agree with what Monica McWilliams said in a previous event in the series about her regret of not pushing more on economic, social and cultural issues. So of course, in the Good Friday Agreement, we have lots of strands on actual institutions, but what we really need to think about is what we as Labour members care about, which is social justice. How do we deliver a more prosperous Northern Ireland for absolutely everyone, from east to west, Belfast, Derry, green, orange, none of the above? How do we deliver on that? Well, we should look more towards regional development. So expanding the motorway across Northern Ireland, expanding train services, really pushing for a university in Derry, which the Labour peer, Lord Donis, has so fervently pushed. And also tackling unemployment. You know, Northern Ireland is just like anywhere else. You can't eat a flag, as John Hume said. We as Labour members should be pushing for economic development in Northern Ireland, and particularly those places that have been forgotten, such as the Council of States in Derry, where unemployment, especially amongst young people, is almost 50–60% on some estates. So to end on a more positive note though, the Good Friday Agreement means everything and nothing to me. It means everything in that I grew up in a place that was largely peaceful, largely quite well invested in. I benefited so much from the peace programs that Aaron and Tara have talked about. But it also means nothing, because if a person cannot get a job, then none of this means anything, because you're more likely to be enticed in the retrograde politics of the 1970s and 1980s, and more likely to get involved in organisations that do not want Northern Ireland to succeed or the Northern Irish people to succeed. So I would finish up by saying, don't relegate Northern Ireland politics to just green and orange. Please think about the same social justice agenda that we want to carry out in England, Wales and Scotland. And thank you for coming. It's so great that you're also interested in learning more. Please share, please talk about these issues at your CLP and branch meetings. And finally, do support the Labour Party Irish Society and Louise Hay. We Labour members want to make Northern Ireland a better place. So to do that, we need to support our most fervent advocates. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Cian. Thank you, Aaron, Tara and Chris for your excellent contributions tonight. I'm keeping an eye on the clock and I can see that it's near 5 to 7, but what I'm going to try and do is get through as many questions as we can. I'm going to ask our panelists to answer them quick fire as well, if you can. So the first one, I know because Aaron's got to go fairly quickly at 7, so I'm going to go to you first, Aaron. What were your experiences of integration in Northern Ireland and how far is it still to go?
Yeah, thank you. I think my experience is I was brought up in that respect in terms of getting involved in youth work, but without the youth work side of things, I would never be involved in any sort of integration. I think the very low amount of integrated schools in Northern Ireland is a huge issue. If we want to try to build a united future, and I think most politicians in Northern Ireland are committed to that, then we need to start thinking of ways to do that. And a key thing to do it is educate them in the same place and start bringing people together and start talking about these things and start addressing these issues. And I think that is a big thing. And moving forward, I think that needs to happen. There needs to be more investment in the integrated education. There needs to be more investment into bringing people together and bringing those groups together and having those conversations. And I think the community and voluntary sector are leading on this in terms, in a way. They're out there, they're bringing people together, they're having the conversations, because the conversations need to have. If the conversations aren't going to happen, they're still going to be in the back of people's minds in terms of the divide that's there. So I think there's a big lot of investment that needs to happen, and I think that comes down a lot to Peter Weir, the education minister. And I think in the past year, I think a lot of campaigns have pointed out that there wasn't a lot of investment. There was funds there and it wasn't invested in integrated education. So I think moving forward, that's where a lot of investment needs to be put in place. And I think if it is happening, that's where you can start. If you start young, you're starting at the root and branch of the issues and you're starting to address it rather than trying to prevent it in a number of years' time.
Brilliant, thank you. And when you have to go, just go. If we don't get back to you as well, thank you for tonight.
I will just nip out now, but I just say huge thanks to everyone. The panelists, those are amazing. I think it's such a great issue. So I will just nip off now just to get into the next meeting. But a huge thanks for inviting me along. It was great. So it was
brilliant. Thank you.
See you later.
Thank you. Take care. Next question is, I'm going to go to Tara and Chris, and you've talked about it a little bit all already. And the question is how have your experiences differed from those of your parents? Let's go to Chris first.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll just give one quick example, linking into what some of the other panelists said. I think not being born rigidly into one of two camps. I thought it was very interesting that Cian said in his contribution, he was born into a Catholic family in the sort of predominantly nationalist Derry, but he wouldn't necessarily identify as a nationalist today. I, on the other hand, was born and raised in a staunchly unionist town, went to a Protestant school. But now within my complex identity, I do identify as an Irish nationalist, and I'm a member of a nationalist party. So I think that's something that would be very different from when my parents were growing up and they were born and just sort of accepted into the sort of two camps narrative.
Tara.
I mean, I think I outlined an awful lot in my opening comments that my life is so dramatically different from my parents. You know, all the experiences I have now, my parents would never have even been able to dream of. And if if we're on the topic of identity, it is one small thing I think my mum had to do, which was now as a young person able to assert my Irish identity. But my mum used to work for the civil service, and there was no option for her to identify as Irish on those forms. She couldn't really exert that identity anywhere, so she had to write British subject to describe who and what she was. And on a really basic level, that's one element. But if you look at, I seen somebody mention in the comments about Lyra McKee and how we say that we know peace, and she was unfortunately killed only coming up to about a year or two ago. But as much as that event showed how much we have to lose and how far back we could regress, because Lyra McKee, it is tragic and as awful as it was, we all know her name and we all can remember her together because that instance is so rare now. Whereas if you were to think about the amount of people lost during the conflict and the amount of people my parents knew that were lost during the conflict, you'd be here all day listing the names. And I think that is such a massive difference that even now we have the luxury of being able to remember somebody that was lost because of how much we have gained. So that's one thing.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just going to go with this. I'm going to keep you on here, Tara, for this one. Your thoughts on this? What has the victory on equal marriage meant to the younger generation in Northern Ireland?
Oh, it's great. I mean, I think Cian already mentioned as well how the majority of people here would absolutely support same-sex marriage. I know that all of my friends, I think it'd be very hard pressed to find somebody that would at the very least, at least be able to empathize with how that would have felt to have that right being withheld from you. It was a fantastic day to have, to be able to see that we're finally stepping forward into the future. I think what's quite unfortunate is the way that it had to come about that way, that it had to revert to, as much as we are so grateful that it was a Labour MP that brought this forward and that it was Westminster were able to legislate for us. It is a terrible shame that for a region that had that devolved power that could make that choice, that there was a willful choice not to. So in one respect, a great step forward, really uplifting, positive moment in our history, and for LGBT people in the North, it was a fantastic moment for equality. But I think we need to still look at why did it take outside intervention to make that step possible, and maybe look at issues with the petition of concern. You could be here all day talking about how that was used and abused to deny people their rights, but in overall positive with caveats.
Cian, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say, well, growing up as a young bisexual man, I always said to myself, I'll get married the year that Northern Ireland brings in same-sex marriage. And I always thought, because like I'd be in my 30s, right, it just takes so long that I'll be like 37, they'll bring it in. And of course I'll get married when I'm like 37. But yeah, it entirely progressive right step. But also like a lot of damage has been done that it took Northern Ireland so long to legislate for same-sex marriage, or at least it took Westminster, because there are a lot of LGBT plus young people who grew up when it seemed that being LGBT was less than, and therefore have left. And yeah, so it's quite sad, but it's entirely great step. It brings us up now with the rest of the British Isles.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to move on to this one. This one's due for you, Chris. And the rest of the panel, but I'm going to come to Chris first. How do you think the voices in communities who want to promote integration can be strengthened?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting question. Integration has been slow post Good Friday Agreement. A good example of that is the fact that both my siblings now are fortunate enough to go to an integrated school in my town, and meet friends from further afield and from different backgrounds and different communities. But a sort of different spin on that is that they have classmates that are coming from miles and miles away every morning just to get into an integrated school because there's so few of them in Northern Ireland. So I think it needs to start right from a young age and right from the bottom, and it's going to require institutional reform of the education system from Stormont, and of course there's some reluctance to do that from the parties in the Assembly. So I think we're a long way off in that regard, but I would say that's the main thing, is that integrated education allows people to come together from a young age, and so you don't have to facilitate things later in life. You know, people are coming together naturally when they're children.
Okay, fair enough. Anyone else want to contribute to that?
Sorry. Do you want to go first again?
Tara, go on, you go first.
I'll just keep it really quick and just say that Aaron touched on that point earlier on about Peter Weir. The Education Minister has an awful lot of responsibility here and has an awful lot to answer for. And that's one part of this. Also, you're saying about voices and trying to promote them. If you're looking for a really positive network of people who are from an integrated education background, there's the Integrated Education Alumni Network. They're on Twitter and they work really hard to try and promote integrated education in society in the North as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Kane, did you have any?
And also one last point as well. I think these conversations are very beneficial. I know that. Sorry, go ahead, Kane, go on.
I think Tara's in a bit of a lag there. Yeah, one bit of very positive news in the past few weeks is actually the very first Catholic primary school to vote to be integrated, because of course parents in Northern Ireland can organise and can change the faith status of the school. And that's a very positive step. I never had the opportunity to go to an integrated school, even though I really wanted to, because in Derry, there's only one integrated school in a city of 120,000 people. So I'm very envious of Chris.
Louise, there's a question here for you. What pressure can Westminster put on with regards to integration?
Well, as has been alluded to, it's obviously a completely devolved issue and is the responsibility of Peter Weir, who is a DUP MLA and responsible for education policy. As Kane's just said, though, there has been some progress in the last few weeks with the first actual shift to an integrated school in Northern Ireland. So that's really positive, but it's still so little progress has been made in the 23 years since Good Friday Agreement, with only 7% of children educated in integrated schools. What I would say is it's kind of a bit of chicken and egg with integrated housing and communities as well. And so integrated schools are much more prevalent in quite frankly more middle class areas of Northern Ireland, like South Belfast, where the communities are more integrated as well. And we've not really touched on it that much tonight, but I've been, although I knew Northern Ireland pretty well, I thought before I took on the brief, I've been shocked at how segregated communities still are, and the prevalence of, for example, community centres and swimming pools, because you have, in certain areas of Northern Ireland, you have to have 2 of everything still, because you have to have them for both sides of the community. And so there really are very limited spaces for young people to come together, and it's only through the work that you've heard these amazing panellists talk about tonight, that the youth work that they've done that has crossed those traditional community divides. There is still, despite it being a devolved issue, still a massive role for us in Westminster to play, and we see integration as very much a legacy area of the Good Friday Agreement, and something that both governments, British and Irish, have a responsibility to promote and keep the pressure on in Northern Ireland, because even though the political parties aren't tripping over themselves to do anything about it, there is enormous public support for it amongst Northern Irish people.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think we're going to sort of have to wrap that up for tonight, and we have gone a little bit over of where we were on that. So I'm just going to, what I wanted to do is just share with you what's coming up in the future. A recording of this session will be available at labour.org.uk/GFA. If you want to find out a little bit more about Labour Party training, what's coming up, please visit that site. We also, if you want to email us at GFA@Labour or the training team, have a look at that. And coming soon, there will be some resources going on to our e-learning platform, achieve.labour.org.uk as well. Also, the next session was planned for Thursday, the 8th of April. We've had to move that session to May time to sort of try and get the best panel and diaries we can get together. So once we know a new date for that, we'll make sure that everyone who's signed up to it has been emailed out with that date as well. So that's the end for the session tonight. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who's joined us tonight, especially Kane, Chris, and Tara as well, and Aaron, who joined us earlier as well. Thanks again to John for joining us as well. And Louise, Lou, do you want to say any final words?
Well, just to echo that, it's been so inspiring to hear from the four of you, and should say, you know, the personal reflections, it's incredibly brave of young people to be speaking out about them as well. So it just adds to how important it has been, and I've seen all the comments flooding in. The real theme that has been said repeatedly, that has cut through all these sessions, is that the Good Friday Agreement wasn't just a piece of paper that was signed in 1998 and can be put on the shelf and all of us can say, right, that's job done, peace is achieved. There is still so much progress left to be made, and we've heard that talked about, you know, in segregation, with still the normalisation of violence in certain communities. And we owe it in the Labour Party to young people in Northern Ireland, both who've had to leave and who are staying at home, and who still haven't got that promise of peace that was made, because it wasn't just the absence of violence, it was about building that prosperous shared future. We owe it to all of them to keep Northern Ireland as a political priority and keep campaigning for all the issues we've heard about today. So thank you so much to the four of you for joining us, and thank you everyone for your continued interest. And as Paul said, we look forward to the event. Date's still to be confirmed, where we have a final look ahead to what we can treat as a priority and really keep in our campaigning priorities as the Labour Party. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, John. Thanks all of you again, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you. Good night.